All right.
All right, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to Violating Trust, Social Engineering, Past and Present by Paul Blonsky.
Thank you.
Without further ado.
Cool. So my second greatest fear with this presentation was that the room was going to be empty. My greatest fear was that it was going to be packed. So I think we're at like a happy medium here. You can like exploit both of my fears. So that's me. Get the usual disclaimer out of the way. For educational purposes only, you know, real fraudsters know this stuff works already. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know. These opinions are all my own. You know, don't blame me. Don't blame my employer. You can blame me, that's for sure. So this is about me. I actually graduated from Wayne State University in 1993 with a degree in anthropology, and I've been, it's been a while since I've been back on campus, but ever since then I've been using my my learning for good and evil. I've been in IT and IT security for about 20 years. I've been strictly on the cybersecurity side now for the past 4 years. I'm an internal pen tester, so I work on network pen testing, and I lead a physical penetration testing team for a financial institution. So I get to essentially break into banks, but it's the same bank over and over again. I have an interest in stage magic and con artists. So the birth of this presentation was twofold. One of them was I'm constantly having to train new pen testers, so we're always kind of looking for new ways to explain to them how this works and give them something to anchor it to. The other one is my management loves to tell us, well, we know you can tailgate into a facility, what else you got? So we're constantly being challenged to come up with new ways to do social engineering. So, you know, if we tailgate into a facility, right, that's testing one control, our security awareness control, but we still have gatekeepers everywhere. So we're always being asked, you know, generate scenarios that actually test our gatekeepers. So those are always face-to-face social engineering scenarios where we walk into a building and test a guard or a gatekeeper. So that's sort of where this came from, was trying to find additional inspiration for, you know, how we're going to generate those scenarios. The specifics, let me go up to the big picture. You know, trust is necessary for society, but people base their trust decisions on weird things, especially, you know, when they're given a first impression. Even when trust decisions are based on facts, sometimes those facts can be manipulated. And con artists of the past have a lot of examples of, you know, how they've violated people's trust. I'm going to talk specifically about a couple of characters from the United States in the 20s and 30s. One of them is J.R. Yellow Kid Weil. This guy operated as a con artist in the American Midwest. He worked out of Chicago, although he committed his cons all over Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan. He had a lot of long cons, real estate cons, mining cons. These were very personal. He got to know people. He worked with them for weeks before he took a lot of their money. In his biography, he talks about another con artist that he crossed paths with, this other guy, Charles Willie, who was known as the Buttering Kid. So I'm trying to set up a dichotomy here between two kinds of con artists. One is the Yellow Kid, who worked long cons. He did very specific personal cons. Our friend the Buttering Kid, his con for his entire career was selling butterine, which is margarine, as butter. So when margarine first came out, it cost a lot less than butter, and it had to be white. When margarine is first produced, it comes out white. You have to dye it to make it look yellow. Well, there was a law that said you couldn't dye it yellow because the dairy interests didn't want that. Well, this guy would buy margarine, dye it yellow, and go sell it on the street as dairy fresh butter. So that was his con. That's a real short con, right? You walk up to somebody's door, you go, hey, you want some fresh butter? And, you know, you sell it for 25 cents a pound or whatever it was. The funny thing is, both of these guys spent time in federal prison. J.R. Weil probably made $8 million in his day conning people on real estate deals. The Buttering Kid went to federal prison for doctoring margarine. So, you know, both of these guys are criminals, but they operate in very different ways. So in our modern scenario, I want to compare these two guys to what we've got today. So we still got the Buttering Kids running around, right? These are sort of your mass spammers. From an evolutionary biology standpoint, these guys use the R strategy, right? They have lots of babies. They send out hundreds of emails, and they hope that one of those little babies, you know, hits the mark. It survives to adulthood and makes them some money. They're going with volume. The nice thing about these guys, and I think we're very good at detecting them, is they make a lot of noise, they follow patterns. There's a footprint for what they're doing. So on the other hand, we have sort of the Yellow Kids of the world, who are much more specific, they're much more personal. These guys use targeted attacks. They do things like, spear phishing. They're very methodical. They're willing to spend time. They're going for the big score. In an evolutionary biology context, they're using the K strategy. They're going to have less babies, but they're going to hope that, they invest a lot of energy in them. That's going to pay off. Again, in the historical context, it did. J.R. Weil, the yellow kid, made lots of money, but he made it from a small number of victims as opposed to, spreading his joy across the world. So let's talk about how you establish trust so you can violate it. There's a few elements that I'm going to talk about. There's more than this. There's all kinds of psychology research out there. But I'm going to hit on a few sort of key points and try to tie it to both the yellow kid and what we do today. So first we have what's called the affect heuristic, and I'll talk about that. This is the gut feeling when, you walk up to somebody and you're like, I got a good feeling about that guy. Con artists are great at this. They're generally people, right? They're a person. They're good at talking to people. They're good at, sidling up to someone in a bar and striking up a conversation. So, trying to train somebody how to do that, you have to go back to fundamentals. You're like, what are people basing this decision to trust you on? Then there's some harder things that people can, harder facts that people will use to base trust. One is expertise. People can ask for credentials, obviously. And then there's a whole concept of, if you act trustworthy, people will think you're trustworthy. So we'll talk about each of those in turn. Let's talk about affect heuristic first. So this is a quote from the Yellow Kid's biography. He's just talking about a businessman he met. So he was in there with one of his Confederates, and they were trying to get this guy to do business with them. It was going to be business that was very much to the detriment of the businessman. So this is a very handy way of saying what everybody knows, right, is look the part. If you're trying to talk to business people, you're going to look like business people. This is, pretty intuitive. But ironically in this case, because, appearances and how people judge people on how people judge you on your appearance are frequently based on stereotypes. They're based on stupid stuff, but that's how people work. And stereotypes change over time. So the interesting and kind of ironic thing about this particular conversation he was having is, this was in the interwar years, and part of his con was going around the Midwest and convincing business people that he was representing the German government, who were interested in investing in American industry. People knew there was a war coming in Europe, but that didn't mean you couldn't make money off of it. So people were willing to trust him if he looked like a businessman, and more importantly, looked like he had the cash to back that up. So, again, the affect heuristic. Nobody speaks German could be a bad guy. Affect heuristic all comes down to appearances and stereotypes. So there's a few, this first one, Wobst in 1977, this comes from my anthropology background. He wrote an article called about identifying stylistic messages. I've got it in the references. I think it's stylistic behavior and appearance. Oops, I may have to start that over. Anyway, Wobst's point was, and he studied in Yugoslavia, his point was that people have to identify others from a distance. And as you get closer to the person, the stylistic messages that they're transmitting become more and more specific. So in the Yugoslavia case, he was saying people identified at great distances by what they were wearing on their heads, because that was real easy to see from a long ways away. As he got closer and closer, they had smaller and smaller details that broke them down into smaller and smaller social groups. So in a social engineering context, what I'm saying is, think about the way you're presenting yourself both up close and from a distance. Are things like hats, outerwear, things like that can influence somebody before you ever even make contact, as they see you coming. Your gait, the way you carry yourself, are you in a hurry, are you nervous? All of those things help establish whether you're trustworthy, whether you seem like a threat. The whole point of the affect heuristic is people will make decisions about whether or not to trust you, whether or not you are a risk, based on things that are not entirely scientific. So the longer you give the target time to develop a positive impression, the better you are, the more likely you are to overcome any negative stereotypes they might have of you coming in. There's another principle here. This actually comes from deception, military deception, Magruder's principle, which is exploit preconceptions. This is just another way of saying if the person's got a stereotype, reinforce it. If you can reinforce that stereotype, feed into it. It's much easier to reinforce an existing preconception than to try to change it. And that's just a precept of deception. If you're going to deceive somebody, try to work with what they already believe and just make that erroneous belief stronger. Again, hats, shirts, outerwear, that kind of stuff. And as a concrete example, if you ever want to really raise the hackles of somebody, walk into a bank wearing a hat and sunglasses. Why? That's what bank robbers wear, right? Tellers hate that. I mean, nothing will freak them out from a distance more than a dude walking into a bank wearing a ball cap and a set of sunglasses, because they're on alert for that. So I have just an example. This guy from a distance, right? It presents two very different opinions in people. He's going to evoke two very different responses. This is a dude in England. He actually, it doesn't help his case any that those are all like white supremacist tattoos. He went through the process of having those removed. He sort of renounced his previous beliefs and had them removed. So this is the before and after picture. But that's definitely two different affects in people when they look at him. One of the other things you notice is he's smiling in one picture and not. That's, another thing about being warm, at least in the United States. Keep in mind that a lot of these things are culturally specific. So in the U.S., warm handshake, smile, people love you. In Russia, you smile, they think you're stupid or you want something. So that's why, Slavs all have a very business-like attitude, because people just don't smile. You're up to something if you do. Oh, sorry about that. I just need a hot button that goes from current slide. So let's move on to expertise. Again, this is a quote from J.R. Wiles' biography. And I want to tell a little story that this relates to, because it exemplifies, how you can convince people you have expertise when you don't. And in his particular case, so this is our friend J.R. Weil on the left. On the right is Pope Yateman. He's a mining engineer. McClure's magazine, which is a nationwide magazine in 1914, published a series of articles called $100,000 a year men. This was guys who made lots of money doing what they did for their employer. So our friend, the yellow kid, found every copy of McClure's magazine he could get his hands on. He took it to his friend, who was kind of a shady printer, and he had him reprint the front page of that article. Just reprint the photograph, so it was a photograph of him instead of Pope Yateman. Everything else in the magazine stayed the same, rebound the magazine. And then he'd have some friends of his go to the local public library, wherever he was working, ask for the McClure's bound edition. It was a few years after it had come out, so they'd already bound him in archives. And they'd sneak it away somewhere and replace the edition of the magazine with his doctored version. Then, as he was working his scam in town, he'd subtly drop, or a Confederate would drop, that, hey, did you see that article about Pope Yateman? No, do you have a copy of it? Well, no, but I'm sure it's in your public library. They'd go to the public library, pick it up, find out, well, this guy made $100,000 a year as a mining engineer. He must know what he's talking about. And of course, he was trying to sell them worthless mining stock. The point of this is, again, this is a very targeted strategy. I mean, he put a lot of work into this, but it had a big payoff, because as soon as people saw that magazine in their hometown, and they actually had to do some work to do it. He wasn't handing them a magazine, go, here, read this. Nope, that's over in your library. You need to go do that. So you're making, it feels to them like they're doing the work, right? They're finding these things out for themselves. So how does this apply today? Well, we all have sock puppet accounts in LinkedIn, right? This is a similar process now. It doesn't require that I sneak a magazine away. I just have to generate a LinkedIn account that people trust. I can say anything I want in a LinkedIn account, right? I can even get endorsed for experience that I don't have. So I don't know anything about mining, by the way. I know less than nothing about mining. I took a geology class in high school. That's as far as it goes. So mining engineer sounded like a cool title when I was like, I'm going to create a fake, mining profile. Oh, mining engineer, it sounds good. It has engineering, it has mining in it. Can't go wrong. I had no idea what they did. So this profile is an absolute mess with what I put in it. But I still managed to get some people to endorse me. How? I just endorsed them, right? I went and made a bunch of friends on LinkedIn. I endorsed them, and something I'm going to talk about later is this whole idea of reciprocity, right? I endorsed them, and they felt an obligation to do something in return. So people I targeted, and all three of these people qualify, were sort of younger professionals that were sort of just starting out. They looked like maybe they would respect authority. They'd be like, oh, this guy who says he's got a PhD from the Colorado School of Mines endorsed me. I better say something to him. So you can create expertise without really knowing what you're doing. What's funny about this, too, is all over social media, people are warning you to not fall for scam accounts, right, for sock puppet accounts. most of this advice is great for identifying our buttering kids, for the guys that are out there just spraying accounts, hoping one of them survives. If you're creating a targeted account, this advice is much less useful. So, one of the things people always talk about is, do a reverse image search. Well, Google reverse image search is great. It's not bulletproof. There are fairly easy ways to get around it. But the easiest way is, if I'm doing a targeted attack, I'm just going to use a real picture, which is what I did. It was an authentic picture. It was a picture of me. It's not going to show up anywhere else on Google image search. What's interesting is the quote on the right, where he's talking about going through his contacts and vetting everyone. That's a quote from somebody that's still one of my contacts on LinkedIn. So I friended him about 2 days before he posted that. He went through and vetted his accounts, and I'm still in there. So clearly, it's a process that, it's going to weed out some people. It's not obviously going to weed out the dedicated attackers. I'm tempted to pitch a paper at some point about fooling Google reverse image search, because there are ways to do it. The algorithms are not bulletproof. They're really meant for making images findable, not identifying fakes. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about credentials too. Again, this is from J.R. Weil, and this is a real old con technique. Is if you needed letterhead from someone, you just send them a letter asking for something stupid, and back in the day, they'd send you a letter back, right? In this case, again, he was pretending he was representing the German government, so while he was in Europe, he sent letters to Hitler and the Reichsbank, and they sent him back letters, and he just copied the letterhead. So in today's world, we have similar credential needs. People base a lot of decisions on whether you've got the proper credentials. I know lots of companies have photo ID requirements for entering their facility. The problem is, of those places that require ID, how many of them have properly been trained to identify what a fake ID looks like? This is related to my fake LinkedIn account. I got busted. They shut my account down. Does anybody want to guess why? I made the same mistake a lot of actual crooks make. Bad operational security. I logged into 2 sock puppet accounts from the same IP address. They flagged both of them and shut them down. It's like, damn, they got me. All right, they sent me a message, said your account's on highly restricted, you're shut down. All right, so you click through. How do I get my account back? Oh, you need to present photo credential. You need to present photo ID, government-issued photo ID. All right, where do I present it? Do I got to bring it in? No, send us a scan of the ID. All right, which one you want? I got lots of ID. I didn't think they'd actually accept any of my bogus vendor IDs. So instead, I went on the internet, spent about 10 minutes. That's not me as much as it looks like me. My fake profile was supposed to be from Wyoming, so I did a Google search on Wyoming driver's license. This is the first one that came up. That's their old version. It's not the real ID version of the Wyoming driver's license. All they wanted was my picture and signature on it. They allowed me to block everything else out, so I did. I also, I went for I'm super paranoid, so I'm going to sign again. Yeah, that's real hard to do when I'm the one who made both IDs, right? They took that. It took them like 10 minutes. I actually got the response I got was a blank email from their support that just had the person's name, but my account was unlocked. So that was pretty trivial to do. Again, that's a process, asking for photo ID. It's going to catch your buttering kids, right? The people that are sending out, creating lots of bogus profiles. If I'm concentrating on one profile, I get a real investment in it. I'm going to spend the time to fake something up. I didn't have to pay $50 to get the fake Wyoming ID. I just had to go on the internet because the $50 ID looks good in person. Just about any piece of junk looks good when it's scanned at 150 DPI and sent via email. You can't even read. I didn't even have to, that's not even really Photoshop. That's Paint. I took and, by hand, copied letters from elsewhere on the sample to make the name. I mean, that's how bad that is. It's like the worst fake ID ever. You realize I made you 72 years old? This is what the new Wyoming state ID looks like. But again, if you have a process, a control in place, and the people enforcing it don't know how to actually enforce it, not a very effective control. And we see this all the time. I can go into a bar. If I'm underage, chances are they're going to know what an ID looks like, and they're going to know how to vet it. But if I walk into a business that says, yeah, we require government-issued ID, how many of them know what a Wyoming ID is supposed to look like? If I walk in with a fake Wyoming ID, are they going to know what that looks like? Do they have access to the book? There's a book that's published every quarter that shows you all the U.S. IDs, all the world IDs. It's awesome. All right, I think I got about 5 minutes left. What's interesting is this just came to light about a week ago. There was a dude in England that had his Facebook account stolen. All the scammer did was send in a copy of his passport. Well, it was a badly scanned copy of a document that's difficult to forge, but when you scanned it, it's not hard to forge anymore. This is just me getting my account back. All right, the last thing I think I'm going to talk about is trustworthy actions. The idea that you do something trustworthy, people will trust you. We sort of talked about this already. A lot of cons employ this technique where they'll give a build-up. They'll even give a little bit of skin to the victim before they take his money. So one way of doing this, one technique for doing this in face-to-face social engineering is, as you're approaching a gatekeeper, do something that's going to think you're a good guy. Hey, I found this thing sitting in the parking lot. Somebody must have lost it. Let me give that to you. It establishes you as you're a good guy. One other technique I like to use is when I'm going to do tailgating, which is a little different, but doing tailgating is to keep it on me a token gift card, like a $5 Starbucks gift card that hasn't been scratched off. So if somebody's about to slam the door in your face, or you decide you want to catch up to someone, you'd be like, hey, did you drop this? Yeah, it looked like it fell right out of your pocket. Not mine. Looks like I don't drink coffee, you can have it. Well, by the time you get done with that conversation, you're probably through the door already. But you're also establishing you as like, hey, you're a good guy, you just gave me $5. The research behind this, which is interesting, is some researchers in the Netherlands, security researchers, went on a university campus, and they started asking people security questions. And one of the questions was, what's your password, right? Well, in addition to the questions they were asking them, they would give them chocolate. Some of them they give them chocolate after they ask all the questions. Some of them they give them chocolate before they ask them all the questions. Well, lo and behold, the ones that gave chocolate before were more likely to answer the password question. It doesn't even matter if that was true. Like, even if they gave them a bogus answer, they still did something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. They felt obligated to answer that question, even if they answered it falsely. It's like they've created a sense of obligation, which, you don't give a gift, you give an obligation. So people feel obligated to reciprocate because our whole society is built on, reciprocating those trust relationships. I got a bunch of resources here. I'll upload the slides at some point. If I forget, ping me on Twitter or email or something, and I'll send you the resource list. There's a bunch of cool stuff in here. Great resources if you like con artistry and close-up magic and just like weird, crazy crap. That CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception, that's an awesome read, by the way. It's got a lot of cool, weird, like CIA 1960s kind of stuff in it, but it's also interesting read from a deception standpoint. It's more resources, and if you got any questions, I think I'm probably hitting up on time, but we're good? Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Funnest social engineering? So I tailgated into a facility one time, and I went in, just sat down in an office, started working. I had a fake badge from a company that was in the process of being merged. So I walked in, sat down, started typing. I was there for about 10 minutes, and somebody on the floor came in and was like, opened the door and then closed it again, walked out. They came back a little later, were like, sorry, but we're not sure who you are. I'm like, oh, I'm from this company. Like, I'm just here, I work for, and I gave them the name of like somebody over at the other company. I'm just doing some work here, just checking out the market, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, no problem. We had somebody who was going to use this room, but we'll move them somewhere else. Like 45 minutes later, 45 minutes later, they come back. They're like, we have a better office for you. This one doesn't have, we want to move you to a better office. Like, so I moved to a better office. Then she comes back and she's like, hey, our market vice president would like to talk to you, blah, blah, blah. So I'm, walk into his office and we start chatting. And again, this is where you got to have a little bit of knowledge about stupid stuff, because you speak in generalities, like, what, I don't know anything about this, but you start saying things like, yeah, with this merger going on, I'm just checking out the area, doing a little bit of research, trying to see where we might have some opportunities, some synergies, if there's any kind of market overlaps. And like 20 minutes later, dude's still talking to me about like what the market is like there. And like, I don't know anything about oh yeah, we have this kind of business and that kind of business. I'm like, I don't care. Just let me out of here, man. You got time for lunch? Yeah, we can go to lunch. Oh man, I'm getting free lunch out of this now too. So it's funny because once people think you belong, it's like, you belong. You can stay there as long as, you're now at home. You can come back every day that week. They'd start, making you coffee when you come in. It's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think my biggest pet peeve is when, people have a requirement for state-issued ID, but they don't teach people how to identify it. It's 9 times out of 10, you come in and they're like, I need your state-issued ID, which they don't even say. They're just like, do you have ID? Sometimes they'll take one of those fake, company IDs, and all they do with it is they look at it and use it to type your name into the computer. Okay, there you go. Like, huh? I promise not to use it. Anyone else have any questions? I really appreciate your, oh yeah. Oh yeah, actually, so this would be cool. I think it'd be really cool to pitch like a panel of just like epic failures in social engineering. Because we do get busted all the time, right? And some of them are hilarious. So I went into one facility, I had a fake Verizon badge, and this particular one, so I make all my badges by hand. I don't have a badge maker, I actually make them. So I like print them out on an inkjet printer, I glue them to another kind of piece of plastic, and then laminate them, and usually they're fine. Well, this one was on the back of a gift card. So it had the mag stripe on the back, the front was the picture. So I walk in, and this is a fairly high security facility. They had like the bullet resistant glass and everything. And the guard is like, who are you? What are you doing? What do you need to do? And I'm like, I'm from Verizon. I'm a field engineer. It's like, we had an alarm on one of the T1s. I just need to check it out. He's like, all right, let me see your ID. And I actually held it up to the glass, and he's like, no, you need to pass it through. All right, here you go. He starts looking at it. He starts calling people. He's like, he's on the phone. He's like calling somebody. Yeah, no, I don't know. No, he's on the list. All right. Hangs up, calls another guy. He's turning it over, and then he's an older guy, like me. His glasses were up here. He's like, turns it over and is looking at it. He gets back on the phone. Yeah, no, he didn't know who he was either. Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I think too. He hangs up, and he's like, well, you're not on the visitor list, and I can't find anybody that knows you're coming. And this ID looks like it's on the back of a gift card. So I'm going to go ahead and deny you access. But I mean, it's great. Those are great. And when people bust us, we always try to reward them. Like, you send them a kudos where you're like, all right, awesome job. You guys did your job. When we get caught, it's awesome. The other spectacular failure is trying an accent. Like one time I thought it would be funny. I was with a new guy, and I'm like, all right, let me do the talking. And we get to the first guard, and he's like, can I help you? I'm like, yes, we need to go up to 3rd floor. It's like, what? 3rd floor, we need to go 3rd floor. We're doing environmental audit. He's like, oh, okay. And the guard's like, okay, whatever, let you up. The problem was it was a really small facility, so we got upstairs, and we're like, get out of the elevator, and it's a whole room full of people, and they're all looking at us. It's like, oh man, this is not going to go well. So I'm like, I'm committed to the bit though. So we're like walking through, and everybody's asking us what we're doing. Like, they're doing environmental audit. We have to look for mold, for water problems, the thing. We're going through, like, I must have told that story like 7 or 8 times. We got to like the end of this row of cubes, and like marching towards us from the other hallway was the facilities manager for that building. He was like, he was going to bust us, and he did. I mean, he dragged us down to his office. He made us go through the story again. It was like, yeah, we got busted. So that happens. I think that'd make an awesome panel though, like spectacular social engineering fails. So that's the stuff that's like, it's great. Like, yeah, we tried that. That didn't work. Anything else? All right. Awesome, man. Thank you.